Big warm welcome, beautiful people, to Lammastide. I often think to myself that the turn of the wheel, the seasons, and that shift in that wheel of the year does feel like a tide. The deeper I take this journey, the more that I feel that to be so. I think there's certain pinpoints on the wheel of the year that we feel that deep kind of call to mark it as a day. But I really do feel that our ancestors wouldn't have lived by such a fixed point in time. Going back, I'm pretty sure that our ancestors would have marked those ebbs and flows by the season itself, by when the corn and grain was ready to bring out of the field, it was ready to harvest. So there wasn't this fixed point in time. But of course, we live in a time where, well, it is in change, but we live in a time where there is this kind of requirement for a fixed point in time. What we're talking about is when nature was our calendar, when nature was our clock, and the season itself, it spoke of the tide and the wax and the wane. And I really do feel, and I don't say this lightly, I really do feel that we are living in a cycle of time that is being woven back into the centre, that we are in a cycle of return. As Spirit have recently said, that the new becomes the old becomes the new. And I'm hearing more and more people kind of say those words, and more that message is being shared. And I think that, without a doubt, many of us are feeling that. So here we are at Lammastide, and I really, really love that phrasing, those words. They feel deep, they feel nourishing, they feel enriched, that rather than at a fixed point. And that was always something that I'd really, really, really struggled with. And I remember a dear friend who is part of our wonderful community had often said, that the beginning of the year isn't on the 1st of January. The beginning of the year is around spring equinox, when everything kind of bursts back into life. And that absolutely makes sense. I think we've been led away from a deeper truth. I think we've been led away from our natural rhythms and our natural cycles of time. But here we are at Lammastide Message. For many centuries, folk have gathered at this auspicious time, the halfway point between solstice and equinox, as the wheel of the year turns, to celebrate the first cutting of the wheat and barley grains, to sustain and nourish throughout the long winter months. It was even said to be bad luck in some parts of Ireland to harvest before Lammastide. So steeped in traditions and connected with the seasons they were, and so we seek to be. Right now, apples are starting to fall, berries are beginning to ripen. I saw my first lot of blackberries over the weekend, so they're there, and the rose hip is out, and I'm going to go and seek out the elderberry to see what's happening with the elderberry. I make a really beautiful syrup that can then be used over the winter months. Elderberry is really enriching with vitamin C, as all the berries are actually that are beginning to appear on the hedgerow that are edible. They are packed with medicine, um, nature's design again. But yeah, I'm going to seek out the elderberry. I'm going to do that in a little while today as I make my way down to the kitchen garden. Should be offered and prayers given. It is all too easy to take for granted the food on our plates. The food on our plates each day. But in these troubled times, especially each grain of wheat should be cherished, each fruiting tree thanked. So here's a thought. When spirits say we're in a cycle of return, there is this deeper appreciation that is being stirred up, that is being awakened with so many of us, you know, with all that's going on in the world, with things as challenging as they have been. There is this deeper awakening to really cherish those really incredible simple things. So when spirits say we're being woven back into the centre, there is this deeper appreciation that is being born out of these troubled times. You know, we are being nurtured into the most dynamic change. Humanity is absolutely being shoved and nourished and nurtured into incredible change. Those things are really happening, those things are taking hold. So, it is all too easy to take for granted the food on our plates each day. But in these troubled times, especially, each grain of wheat should be cherished, each fruiting tree thanked. Not every tree bears fruit each year, and therein lies a lesson. How quickly do we rush to buy our vitals from the shops with barely a thought to their origin? How irked do we feel when what we want isn't on the shelf? How lucky have we been that this is now an expectation? And what can we learn from this? Around the world there has always been people hungry and in need, as we know. As wars and famine rage, how much more gratitude we need to show for where we are and what we have. Yet even in this small and relatively safe first world country, there is hunger and need. I was listening to another wonderful, inspirational person chatting and talking the other day, who was saying that there are now more food banks than McDonald's in the United Kingdom. You spare that for thought. There are more food banks than there are McDonald's in the United Kingdom. And only in the last week or so, management level within the NHS has been sending out a memo and a blanket email to their staff to how they can access food banks. You know, and the many people that I get to speak to who are in a really challenging, desperate situation are really feeling as if they failed, yet they're working every hour that is possible, and yet they're having to access food banks. Now that's no failure on their part. It's a systematic failure on the culture that we're living in, the way that we are living. But here's the thing, as I always say, even though when we meet those deep, harsh truths, there is change that is stirring, you know, everything is folding in. So when we're in a cycle of return, you know, there's this sense of everything folding in, and from the folding in is the rebirth, the change, the alchemization, and the transformation. So how blessed are we that we have food on our plates, clothes on our back, and a roof over our heads. So while we gather to show our humble gratitude for the natural food harvest, can we take a moment to also show our gratitude for our life harvest? What has become the seeds we have sown during our lives to bring us to this fortunate place we are now? A lovely medicine story about that, but in the future. What can we do to help others sow and nurture seeds that will allow them to be as abundantly fruitful and fortunate as we are here? As we take time to weave our corn dollies, we invite you to take some time to think about what we are harvesting from our lives, all the wonderful things we have to be grateful for, and what we are carrying forwards. What are you weaving into the world?